Yo, what up? I'm back on my disclaimer that if I look exhausted, it's because I am exhausted. I slept from about midnight till 6 a.m. last night, maybe 1 a.m. till 6 a.m. And it's about 6:30 a.m. right now. So any of you who came from my pretty face, I'm even less pretty than usual. I got a message, though, from Amy on the east coast of Canada. That I really feel like I want to record a reaction to just now. Look. So Amy is a vegan and she's a supporter here on Patreon. And first and foremost, I mean, I give her credit. She's actually trying to organize vegan action, vegan activism in Halifax, Canada. And just already for that, I've got tons of respect for her. Here in Victoria, as you guys know, at this moment, I'm packing up to move to China. I'm not organizing anything. I'm not engaged in activism aside from, unless you count me talking to you right now on YouTube. So first and foremost, I respect the hell out of that. In case you guys hadn't noticed, this desk has mysteriously changed color because I've already packed up and thrown away the wooden desk that was here before. So you get a plastic desk for just these last few days that I'm in Canada at all. I'm going to read you this email I got from Amy. I'm going to read you my reply, and I'm going to tell you some related thoughts. I mean, a lot of this stuff, it's painful to me that I have so much to say. Like, some of these things, I wish I didn't have a lot to say about them. Oh, this brings up a lot for me. All right, Amy writes, quote, I met with a local self-proclaimed vegan activist here in Halifax. It was a really weird tea. She didn't seem very well informed on many subjects and was a huge proponent of Gary Yourofsky, which turned me off. She seemed really upset when I passively explained that I don't support violence in any way. She came off as incredibly militant. She started going on about how she wanted a war. I feel really foolish for having met with her, frankly. She originally said she wanted to meet with me because she had an interest in working on my workshop. So Amy has been she's on YouTube, but she's also been planning a workshop of a particular kind. You know, discussing veganism and discussing how to be vegan on a budget and some other specific issues. She said she had a history of public speaking. She said she did all kinds of this stuff all the time. When we actually sat down to talk, all she wanted to do was drill me with questions on how to start a YouTube channel. Who should watch on YouTube and make friends with, etc., etc. I really felt used, and, well, it reminded me of why I dislike activists so much, LOL. I guess I'm trying to figure out how I can positively influence people. I'm not militant, I don't support condescending attitudes or violence or any other silly tactic that seems so popular on YouTube. Maybe this is a really small step, but I decided to organize a vegan picnic for the end of the month. I thought if people feel a sense of community, maybe they'll be more empowered to spread a message to non-vegans, or maybe it'll simply be a nice picnic. Do you think doing these things is pointless? And I was talking to my ear. So my reply that I wrote is almost entirely to the very first part of what she's just said, because this issue of violence and phony radicalism has been a huge issue in my own life. It's something I've dealt with within Canada again and again. So I said to her first and foremost, Amy, this obviously echoes various experiences I've had in Canada in connection to petty politics of various kinds, not just veganism. So in response to this issue of meeting someone who poses as militant and who speaks in terms of wanting a war, I wrote back saying, yeah, I've had that experience in various contexts, and the people proclaiming war rarely have anything to offer themselves. I remember at Cambridge, England, attending a meeting of ultra-leftists only because it was advertised as a symposium on police brutality, something it wasn't at all, as it turned out. It was false advertising for what that meeting was. The various attendees insisted on speaking strictly in terms of a social war. So again, that situation, we were in a room, a lavishly decorated room, a room much more beautiful than the room I got married in. You know, it's kind of gorgeous, late medieval, sumptuous, aristocratic decor that Cambridge University has to offer. In this elite You can't even call it a bourgeois institution. This, frankly, aristocratic elite institution in England. And you have people who are self-defined revolutionary leftist extremists sitting down and talking about, war and bloody revolution. But just the room the conversation was happening in made the whole exercise seem absurd, although the absurdity was certainly not visible to those people themselves. I remember, so continuing, just quoting my reply, I remember an academic room within University of Toronto where a meeting on electrical power generation, no kidding, was attended by communists who insisted casually that the problem of electricity generation would be only solved when the streets ran red with blood and the proletariat rose up in class warfare, etc. So again, that was also absurd. Now, University of Toronto is a less impressive campus than Cambridge University in England, but the specific room that took place in had beautiful wood paneling, was again a somewhat sumptuous or beautifully decorated room. And the people attending that, these were all people from the older generation. I was one of the youngest people in the room for that meeting, and it was supposed to be a session dealing with practical problems of ecology and how electricity organization was organized in that part of Canada. And when the one guy said, always remember the other people sitting in the room were all older. There was me and there was one guy who was with me who were not of this character. But this one guy said in preface, well, these problems, we can talk about them for this meeting, but really this is only going to be solved when there's this revolution and, the ruling class are murdered. Because that's what class warfare means. Again, see my essay about that massacre that happened in 1920. Class war is not a joke. It's talking about people being killed, people being massacred. And that's what communists have done historically. I mean, you have to know what those words mean, what they mean in theory, and what they mean in practice. The theory is violent as hell. The practice is violent as hell. It's no joke. And it's... Anyway, and so this one guy at this meeting about electricity generation in this academic context, and this somewhat luxurious context, to be blunt, he talked about that this problem really was only going to be addressed when this mass murder happened. And these other, middle-aged or elderly people sitting around the table all went, yes, right, yeah. Like there was this, agreement, there was this assent going around the table. Now, as is the case of that kind of meeting, it was quite some time between when he said that and when I got my chance to speak. You wait your turn. That guy finishes speaking for 20 minutes or something, and I put up my hand, and then I spoke. And, it might have been somebody else spoke before me. You speak in turn. But I was the only I addressed that directly. I had several points to say on electrical generation, how that was organized. I knew about that stuff at the time. I was really involved in and interested with ecology, so I had some specific points of that. But I addressed directly. I said, "Excuse me, who do you think you're speaking to?" And just the assumption, this is downtown Toronto, the assumption that everyone in that room was not only a socialist of some kind, but was a violent anti-establishment communist, was sickening to me. And again, it was the same thing at Cambridge, England. I mean, at Cambridge, England, when I was there, I had already lived in at least 2 communist countries. Communist still today. People's Republic of China, People's Democratic Republic of Laos. Those are communists still today, and I've been in many more former communist countries like Cambodia. Cambodia totally devastated by communism. I mean, none of these people. I mean, God. I mean, communists like to use this term "paper tigers." They're all such paper tigers, dude. Have you ever dealt with real violence? I have dealt with real violence in my life. The truth is, the main reason why there hasn't been more violence in my life is just the way I look. People tend not to bring violence to me because they can tell I'm prepared to deal with it. And that's everything from crime to political violence, precisely because I'm ready to handle violence. People don't try to push me around. And that includes even like corrupt police. I don't mean police in Canada, but like police in Cambodia and Laos. People do not try to mess with me because I look poor, I look tough, and I act in a manner which is just like, hey, If this is what's on, I'm down for that daylight action. I'm down for the party, man. And, when people have threatened to put me in prison for crimes I didn't commit, where, like I would feel no guilt, or just to extort me or just to bully me, there's been a threat to put me in prison, which, happened in Laos and what have you. I didn't go to prison in Laos. I was threatened with being sent to the gulag to be published. My whole attitude was, all right, great. You put me in prison for 5 years. I'm going to come out speaking 3 languages. This is going to be a positive experience in my life. I'm down for it. When people have threatened to rob me or stab me or something, my whole attitude is, all right, I'm more generous with my blood than I am with my money. I ain't got no money to lose anyway. Let's do it, homeboy. Let's see what you got. And people have. I've had someone pull out a machete on me and try to kill me on the banks of the Mekong River. That didn't go so well for him. And I ain't got no scars on my body. I've had people threaten me with violence, and I've been around real violence, but only to a tiny extent because I'm prepared for it, and because also just mention I drink no alcohol. So like I knew people who had guns pulled on them in Cambodia, guns pulled out and pointed at them. In one case, the gun being fired and so on. I don't know anyone who was shot because they'd be dead, obviously. But that never happened to me, partly because I was never drunk and I was never going to, I was never going to nightclubs and that kind of thing. But I knew a guy, smart guy too, smart, tough guy. And that guy had a background in martial arts and boxing and semi-military training, not real military training. He dropped out of the paratrooper corps in France. But I remember that guy. He had a little kid stick him up with a submachine gun, with a portable machine gun with folding stock, and the kid was so tiny, that in order to hold this gun at him, the kid had to put one foot on a brick and prop the butt of the gun. The kid had to lean against a brick wall, because the kid couldn't really handle the weight of the gun. So, violence is real. I have only had to deal with this much violence in my life because of who I am, how I roll, what I look like. Again, I have advantages and disadvantages in life. I'm often surprised that, people like police and other authority figures treat me with as much respect as they do. I've commented on that here in Canada, in Southeast Asia. I know I look a bit rough, but that has made violence less of an issue in my life because, like I say, I'm down for it. Whatever people want to bring at me, I'm ready to get brung. And so they don't bring that much. But I mean, Jesus Christ, these phony extremists. And I've had to deal with it so much, even just within Canada. I've had to deal with it with vegans within Canada, and it totally distorts veganism, makes veganism counterproductive. And I've had to deal with it in the Green Party. I mean, people would think I was crazy if you talk about this stuff and people don't know the context. Green Party of Ontario was full of communists, full of violent extremists, full of people who wanted to talk about war and revolution. The Green Party of Saskatchewan, when I was there, and I had to deal with that, like face to face. I had to deal with that. I had to address that. And face to face, when I was in Saskatchewan, the Green Party, I got involved with the Green Party there again, and I was very disappointed. One of the influence I was trying to have, I was trying to make the Green Party really address and be relevant to First Nations politics and Indigenous people's politics, among other issues. Obviously, they already cared about ecology. But when I was in Saskatchewan, the Green Party had just made the transition there. They used to be controlled by communists. They were basically founded by disgruntled communists and extreme left-wing people who had all quit from another party or from several other parties to form that local Green Party. And so, this kind of irrelevant radicalism, totally counterproductive radicalism that can't help you with ecology, can't help you with political organization, can't help you with any of the type of community organizations I've been talking about. And it's a way of thinking about social change that, because it is rooted in violence and its ultimate objectives are violence and its means are violence, it never thinks through the type of examples you guys have heard me talk about 10 times on this channel. What about cigarette smoking and how cigarette smoking has changed society? What about social organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, really effective non-party forms of activism? When I was in the Green Party even, I was just trying to talk to them about publications, about having a magazine that talked about ecology and the science of ecology and social change in relation to that. You just had a magazine gathering together bits of news that people who donate money to the Green Party would care about, and talking about that stuff in an authentic way that would mean so much, and it would justify people donating money to you. Ecology has a scientific aspect as well as an ethical aspect, as well as a vegan aspect. If you had a magazine addressing those things instead of phony threats of violence and revolution, it would make such a positive difference. And this is in Canada. Jesus Christ. You want to talk about resorting to violence here in Canada. Have you been to City Hall? No, none of these people have been to City Hall. They've never been to Parliament. They've never tried the legal means of making a difference. And when I did that stuff, when I was nobody, when I was a young kid in university going to City Hall, I met and spoke with some of the most powerful people in Canadian politics long term. I interacted with two different guys who later became heads of the NDP, of our Democrat Party. I guess one at that time was a former head of the party, and the other was a future head of the party. These are among the most powerful people, and I was nobody. They're among the most powerful people in Canadian politics. Here in Victoria, I had a complaint against my university. I went directly to Parliament, dealt with my member of Parliament. It's presented to Parliament. Nothing's going to come of it, but it's still very gratifying. Real outcomes compared to this phony-ass radicalism and so on. I had an image I used to post all the time that related to my experience in Cambodia, showing the devastation of revolution in Cambodia, with a quote saying, there's no room to be a fake dress-up revolutionary when there's a real revolution going on. But these people who preach violence, they both lack a pragmatic connection to meaningful politics and to thoughts about how political change actually happens, how to really make political change happen. And they also have avoided learning lessons from history. They've avoided reading about actual revolutions, what really happens with real class warfare, with real violence when it goes on. So this remains something glorified and abstract in their minds, which is sickening to me. Something people on the left wing say all the time, and I understand. Believe me, I have studied the Vietnam War, especially with reference to Laos, Cambodia, etc. I've studied the Vietnam War, but people on the left talk all the time about learning the lessons of Vietnam. Yeah, well, why don't Jesus Christ, there are a lot of lessons to learn from Vietnam. There are lessons to learn from the real communist revolutions, political revolutions that have happened in Vietnam, in Russia, in China, in Cambodia. What? God damn. You want to talk about violent revolution on look, communism is insane. I mean that sincerely. Please, if you think I'm exaggerating, read that essay I wrote dealing just with one aspect of the Russian Revolution, of violent communism in 1920. It's a case study that really tells you what communism is about, what class warfare is about, what this kind of mass murder looks like in practice. There are a lot of lessons to learn from that. But as crazy as communism is, one thing you can say in its favor is at least they pretend to represent a large class in society. Like the Bolsheviks in Russia, they didn't even claim to represent the majority, but they could say, well, about 25% of Russians are members of this industrial poor class that they represent. So they could say they represented 25% of the population. In reality, would that 25% even vote for them if they had an election? That's another story. But, communists in different countries can claim to represent 25% or 50% of the population. Sometimes they claim to represent the poor. Now in Canada, what percentage of the population are really poor, right? These are the problems you get into. But anyway, they claim to represent some mass organization, some mass movement. Vegans can never claim that. I mean, in 2016, do we represent 1% of the population? Do we represent 2% of the population? Why would violence be justified or effective on behalf of that 2% of the population? This is mimicking a mentality that is from like the 18th century in Europe, not even the 19th century, of assuming that political radicalism, simply by declaring itself radical, represents a huge class of oppressed people. And if those oppressed people are just given leadership, violent leadership, then they will suddenly rise up and vindicate your movement. And this is, of course, a very biased allusion to the experience of the French Revolution, especially. Really, I don't even mean one French Revolution. I mean several French revolutions, none of them being really studied or thought about critically. God, yeah, look at the French Revolution. What was the outcome? Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon reestablished slavery. You want to talk about learning the lessons from Vietnam? You want to talk about learning the lessons of history? You want to talk about learning the lessons of these revolutions? Why don't you actually study what happened in those revolutions? The total disaster, the loss of life on a scale unbelievable, and the outcome being establishing a dictatorship so horrible, you yourself would not want to live through it. And that was true of the French Revolution, singular, or revolutions plural, the revolution in China. God damn, take a look at what communism actually did in Vietnam. Once you get past the kind of phony narrative of looking at Vietnam as the victim of American aggression, which of course it is. American bombardment is very real, but communist dictatorship is very real also. Mass murder by communist dictatorships. Jesus, and murder during the revolution itself, and what class warfare really means. There are a lot of lessons to learn from the Vietnam War, or from all of these wars, or from the stupidity of this pro-war, social war attitude. So all of this, for me, pours out in response to this message from Amy, and Amy's attempt to organize activism in Halifax, Canada. But look, to come back to the Ecology and Green Party as an example. So I've just said vegans can maybe represent 2% of the population. Generously, I hope 2% of the population in Canada sympathize with veganism. Ecology, the Green Party, again, is it 2%? Is it 5%? Why would violence possibly be justified? It's just this mentality, the idea that there's a huge number of oppressed peasants, oppressed factory workers, which again is 200 years ago, and that if only a group of radicals put together a party, put together a vanguard is the word in communism, then those people will rise up and mobilize in response to those ideas. That absolutely cannot be true. The nature of the ideas, if you're talking about ecology, there is just no reason why preaching transition to electrical cars would result in the poor rising up that way, even if the poor are oppressed. In some countries, the poor really are oppressed. Still today, in 2016, in some countries, the peasants are oppressed. The factory workers are oppressed, where you can say, yes, that's the truth. However, if they're going to rise up, maybe they're going to rise up violently to demand more money, to demand, better health care. Maybe there's something they're going to rise up for. But it's not going to be ecology. It's not going to be a vegan diet. It's not going to be animal rights. You're kidding yourself, and you're really making a kind of phony carbon copy of the hype for communist revolutions, which today I feel is fully 200 years out of date. Maybe you feel it's only 150 years out of date or something. Different people will have different historical attitudes. But to me, this is an echo of bullshit made up about the French Revolution. And that was applied to, even situations in Germany and Russia that really had nothing to do with it. And that were disasters. The Russian Revolution was a disaster. The Russian Revolution, Lenin, his whole significance was that he led a coup d'etat and got rid of elected government. They had legitimate elections, and Lenin ruined them because he wanted to be the leader of a dictatorship instead of allowing a parliament to exist. A parliament that elected a left-wing government, but not Lenin, that elected a variety of socialists. And for that, communists should feel guilty, that they were anti-democratic from day one. Their goddamn Russian Revolution they glorify so much was not founded on democracy. It was founded on the denial of democracy, the quashing of, the suppression of, the strangling of democracy in a country, namely Russia, that struggled so much to try to have elections in a legitimate democracy to replace the Tsar, the rule of a king, basically, the rule of a terrible dictatorship. And Lenin poisoned that. It's one of history's great tragedies. And communists still today are defined as the people who are willing to tell lies about that and glorify that history for their own cynical ends. And yes, it's a problem. It seems unbelievable in 2016, but when I was there, so I was in Cambridge a couple years ago, but this is all 21st century. It seems absurd, but yes, ecology in Toronto, the Green Party in Saskatchewan, and meeting with academics in anthropology at Cambridge University, England, in those places, communism is still a real force, even though it's such a discredited ideology, even though like CNN News does not take communism seriously. And these people believe insane conspiracy theories about Vladimir Putin and Russia, even though there's nothing left-wing about Vladimir Putin and Russia. I mean, the far left, as a factor within veganism, is terrifying to me for all these reasons and more that I have outlined. Okay, returning to my letter here, my reply to Amy. I say, yeah, I've dealt with pro-violence vegans here in Victoria, as I've whined about on my YouTube channel. So I have already complained about that. And I say, and I think those people now hate and fear me, as my YouTube channel has had more impact than anything they ever did with their activism. And yes, I realize how tiny my YouTube channel is, but it is still bigger than their horseshit, than their projects here in Victoria. So again, I don't really know that. Those people haven't taken the time to tell me to my face how much they hate me, but I've kind of seen it. So the pro-violence people really dislike me because I do not play along with this fantasy, with this game. So in response to Amy saying that she feels foolish for having met with this person, for having met with this pro-violence person, I then say in reply to that, one of the lessons concerned here relates to having a party constitution or an equivalent document that defines your organization or charity. Being anti-violence or anti-revolution may seem like an absurd point to even bother making in such a document, but it is crucial. It's crucial even for the Green Party, and it's crucial for the Liberal Party and what have you. So I'm not going to talk about that too much right now, but that's really part of classical political science. I didn't learn in the classroom. I had to learn on my own. But, like in Canada, we have a mainstream party called the Liberal Party, and their constitution is very vague and very general, but it's still important. So it sets down things like the party's commitment to never supporting homophobia, that's outside of bounds, that they will not support homophobia or suppression of gay rights. Now, that may seem like today, it's like, well, that seems like a joke. Why bother having that as a defining aspect of the Constitution? No, it's not a joke. Those are exactly the principles that become important. So when the Liberal Party organizes a plenum, a party conference or something to discuss policy and plans for the future, there will be Christian groups, that have money and organization and come to that plenum, and they want to present their case for something that is homophobic, even if it's politely homophobic, because that's what they sincerely believe in. Maybe they're Catholic or whatever. They're against gay rights in some sense. And the party can say, they don't have to have the debate. They say, no. If that's your position, then you have to quit the party. Because the Constitution, the definition of this party, is only for people who agree to this principle about homophobia. So it's not a joke. It shapes the whole party discourse, even though it's at that incredibly broad and vague level. So when you have an organization, whether it's a charity, an NGO, foundation, vegan thing, even though it may sound like a joke to say, look, we do not support revolution. We do not support an armed uprising against the government. That may sound like a joke, but the point is that whenever you have a plenum, whenever you have a session or something, or we don't support violence of different kinds, violence like Gary Yourofsky, you could iterate all these things, then the point is you don't even have that debate. Then when you have a conference or a plenum, you get to avoid all that. If people show up and they're preaching that, you say, look, maybe you didn't read the party charter or the party constitution or the organization's definition. No. None of that's acceptable discourse here. If that's what you support, you've got to start a different foundation. Because this party or this foundation, that's in our Constitution, that we don't do that. So in terms of setting the ground rules, definitely in Canada, I mean, it might be different. I have some viewers who are in Muslim countries and very different political contexts. But the party constitutions, charters, they are largely negative in their statements. They state what you will not do, what you will not discuss. And many people who don't have a background in political science, they don't realize how important that is. Like they read this so the Liberal Party, it doesn't define liberalism. It doesn't tell you positively what liberalism should be or what the message of liberalism for society in the future is, or a vision of a liberal utopia. None of that's there. It doesn't tell you in a positive way what's good about liberalism, not at all. But it tells you negatively all the things the Liberal Party will exclude, and then those are the debates you don't have. So again, the reality was for the Green Party in Saskatchewan, when I was there, the majority of their members had just quit, and had quit angrily because the communists had lost power within that party. So, they just had reasonable people. The people in charge were just kind of normal people. It's not like they hated communism. They were just normal Canadians who were not extremists, who were not communists. They were left of center, but they were kind of normal people took over this party. And then they were dealing with intense hatred from the former communists who founded that party. It used to be the majority of the active members. So I got to witness that. That was a bit surreal. Anyway, so Amy then says she is not militant, and I just said, look, honestly, there is a very limited viable role for militancy within veganism in Canada in 2016. People want to talk tough and get on an ego trip. And to be honest, I can understand that to some extent. I can understand why people want to feel tough and want to talk tough and want to pose in this way. Pardon me. But thinking in terms of outcomes, effective activism, etc., what role for militancy is there? You can even refer to my video on conspiracy as a concept. Many of these people would be better off trying to form a conspiracy akin to a corporate lobby rather than preaching violent revolution. All right, guys, that is what it is. Let's end this video there. I've talked to you guys from about 6:30 a.m. till after 7 a.m. here in Canada. As mentioned, this is what I look like when I'm completely exhausted. No makeup, no intro, no outro, real talk. These are the issues I've dealt with my whole life. I wish it was a joke. I wish I could say that these types of extreme politics were not an issue in Canada. You'd think, the streets run red with blood in Canada, but they are. And violence and nonviolence, in theory and in practice, remain profoundly important fundamental issues for vegans to be able to get to grips with. And again, why is that? It's not just because violence is a means to an end, but violence shapes the end, shapes the objective so profoundly of what you're trying to do that it pollutes or it distorts all of the stages leading up to that. So the Green Party, using the same example, when I was there, they were not even thinking about having a magazine that talked about science, like science news, new scientific stuff in relation to ecology. Even though it was so obvious, like if you're doing fundraising, you want people to donate money to you because you're an ecological movement, the type of people who donate money, they will really value a magazine that comes out every 3 months telling you about recent events, within Canada, but recent scientific discoveries, recent research related to ecology, related to pollution in some river, or that's what those people want to read about. But that was a shockingly new idea, a shockingly original idea to people inside the Green Party when I presented to them. Not because they're stupid, or some of them are stupid, but they do not think in those terms at all, because the paradigm of violent revolution, the paradigm, that outcome, thinking in those terms, means they're not thinking about the really constructive methods of how to build a constituency, of how to build an effective movement. And when I first started talking about cigarette smoking and government attempts to discourage nicotine and social activist movements in relation to nicotine and alcohol, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, cigarette smoking, when I started talking about that on YouTube, many vegans wrote into me and said, wow, that's a shockingly original idea. They'd never thought of those comparisons. Why? Again, not because they're stupid, although stupidity is real. Many of the people involved are stupid. They had never thought of those things because the paradigm of violence, this objective, these methods, so distort the discourse, so direct your attention away from really salient considerations of effective activism, of how do we organize a movement, what are our methods, what are our means, what are our outcomes. So again, ecology pure and simple and veganism. Communism has been one of the most influential ideologies in the history of the world. It's a huge problem in terms of how it distorts the way vegans think about changing the world. It's an even bigger problem if you were involved in labor activism, like labor unions trying to help workers' rights or raise wages or what have you. So there are many deep, unexamined assumptions about how we pursue social change that comes out of the last 200 years of experience with communism and radicalism. And I can't say it's irrelevant to all circumstances in the world in 2016. You know, there are extreme circumstances. There's Somalia, there's, Saudi Arabia. There are all kinds of really extreme political circumstances around the world where maybe we'd be having a totally different conversation. But yeah, in these white, Western, decadent, democratic contexts, it is shameful to me. It is shameful to me that vegans want to be phony, dress-up revolutionaries. And I say shame on you. You guys have already seen my videos. Shame on Gary Yourofsky for taking the platform he had to advocate positive social change and polluting it with a pro-violence message. What up?